Welcome to the program today. My name is Mondo Gonzalez, here with a archaeology update, and I have a special guest in studio. We were doing some programs on some other things. Dr. James Hoffmeier, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. And we've been really talking about a variety of things, but Dr. Hoffmeier was my professor, one of my professors doing my archaeology stuff, my degree there. And he's been working in and been involved really in studying and defending the idea of a historical exodus for a long time. And I wanted to grill him about a new article that he's published, and I'll read you the title. It's in the Tyndale House Bulletin, and it's called The Hebrew Exodus from and Jeremiah's Exodus into Egypt in the Light of Recent Archaeological and Geological Developments. So, as always, archaeology is always moving, it's shaking. There's greater technology that has come along, and so some of that has happened, especially at the site where Dr. Hoffmeier has been working. Let's talk here for a moment. What is Exodus, in case people don't know?
Exodus is the opposite of the Exodus.
Okay.
So two Greek words, exodus, the road out, and Exodus is the road in.
Okay.
So if you ever go to Greece and go to the airport, when you arrive at the airport in Athens, you'll see exit signs. The word is written in Greek, exodus, and an entrance is called an exodus.
Okay, helpful, very good. So kind of tell us what you, of course, give it a little bit of background for those that might know you as much as you want, just about your work down in Sinai as it relates to the Exodus and what this contains.
Yeah, well, between, I made my first, if you will, investigative visit to Sinai in 1994, trying to identify archaeological sites to work. And for the next several years, I was involved in surveying and working with a geologist colleague to do some what we call paleo-environmental research, trying to understand the ancient environment based on geological work, not so much archaeological, although the two methods overlap. And then that led to archaeological work and more geological work. And we've tried to understand this northeastern delta frontier of Egypt. That's the zone between Egypt's delta and the Sinai proper. Because of the delta areas are very quick to develop and change because rivers meander and silt up and so on. So the area that was the eastern delta of Egypt, where two Nile branches flowed out into what is today Sinai, today is all desert. But in ancient times it was had Nile branches flowing through, and there were lakes and various bodies of water. And so part of what we were trying to do is get an understanding of this area for understanding both ancient Egyptian history and how Egypt defended itself from would-be invaders, but at the same time, it's a powerful defense against anyone trying to leave, like the Hebrews. So that's the essence of the work that began in 1994. And 2007 was the last year we actually did geological work and we collaborated with the Geological Survey of Egypt, and we're actually drilling down into the subsurface soils to understand the ancient lake systems that were there 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. Today it's all desert.
You know, I think that's an important point, because if you're not trained in thinking like an archaeologist, and I know I wasn't originally, and we have this very naive, maybe that's a harsh word, I don't mean it that way, but we're
uninformed.
Uninformed, that's a better word, thank you. We have this uninformed idea that if I see something, I read something about in the Bible, I go there today, I look at it, and then I make a determination on what I see today versus, you know, at least with the Exodus, you're talking, 3,000 plus years ago, so that what you see today, we can't assume that it was a desert back then, right? I mean, it seems very basic if you're an archaeology person, but some people don't grasp that. So you're back there, you're digging down, looking for what it was like thousands of years ago. Right.
We were aided, the geologists were aided by the fact that this whole area of North Sinai was being transformed into an agricultural zone. And so they had crisscrossed the area with drainage canals for runoff from the fields. And so in so doing, they basically did the geological work, that is exposing the subsurface soils down 5, 6, 8 feet, And so the geologist could simply go along and read the
Wow.
stratigraphy and see where there was black soil versus sand, and where there were shells, and where there were different kinds of sediments. And so that really facilitated our work, basically opening up. And there's only in a few places where we actually dug or drilled or augured down into locations that weren't cut through for us.
Yeah. So this article that you've written, you bring up the idea of Jeremiah. Kind of tell us how, where you're going with it. How's Jeremiah involved? You know, Jeremiah lived way after the Exodus. What's the connection?
First of all, it's my opinion, based, hopefully informed opinion, that the very zone through which the Exodus took place, namely the northeastern frontier of Egypt, was also the same area that somebody traveling the other direction would enter Egypt. We know there were two roads in and out of Egypt that connected Canaan. The one road ran parallel to the coast, although sometimes it's, you actually can't see the Mediterranean, but it was not far from the Mediterranean, and ran along a line to what is today still the crossing point between Egypt and Gaza, or the Palestinian territories, the town of Rafah. Mm-hmm. And Rafah was known going back 3,500 years ago in Egyptian texts. So if you're coming from Canaan to Egypt, when you arrived in Egypt, and we know this from biblical texts, that right opposite Egypt in this zone there was a body of water called Shihor. It's mentioned in the book of Joshua when it's talking about territories from Egypt onwards. It's actually mentioned in Jeremiah also. Again, it's called Shihor. Shihor is Egyptian, means the waters or lake of Horus, the sky god. So we know from the Bible, and this name Shihor also pops up in papyrus texts described as on the frontier of Egypt. Alongside of Shihor, or adjacent to Shihor, another body of water is mentioned in a papyrus called Anastasi III. Anastasi III mentions two bodies of water in parallelism, that is Shihor, and the other one is called Patufi. And the Egyptian word tufi is linguistically related to the Hebrew word suf, as in the Sea of Reeds. The name of the sea, when the body of water through the Israelites passed, when it's given a name, is called Yam Suf. Other times simply called Hayam, the sea. But the word Suf and the Egyptian word Tuf are linguistically related. They're cognate. And so what I have argued for is that these two bodies of water figure in both in terms of the Exodus and Jeremiah's entry to Egypt. As I said, Joshua, the book of Joshua mentions Shihor, as does Jeremiah, interestingly enough. And we'll leave the Exodus side of that story set aside because that's a whole topic in and of itself. But the reference to Shihor comes to us in Jeremiah chapter 2, when Jeremiah, or God speaking through Jeremiah, complains of how Israel is turning to its neighbors for political relief. And in 2:18, Jeremiah 2:18, God says, "And now what do you gain by going to Egypt to drink the waters of," and I'm reading from the ESV, "the Nile." In Hebrew it reads Shihor, the waters of Horus. It doesn't use the word Nile. There's a separate, and the Egyptian word for Nile is Yaor, and that's not used here. Mm-hmm. How it's translated this, at least some translations. So look at the contrast. What are you going to drink the waters of the Nile, or what do you gain by going to Assyria to drink the waters of the Euphrates? So I think our translators saw the word Euphrates, say that's a river, so Shihor must be a river, it's parallel. What I'm suggesting is that the two bodies of water represent the boundaries or the entry points to the country. You cross the Euphrates, you're in Assyria. You pass through Shihor, you're in Egypt. But Shihor is a lake, and we did investigation of that lake. It was approximately 5 miles long by 5 miles wide. We found one branch of the Nile that flowed into it, and another one that we knew about before from satellite images. You could actually see the little traces of the river that emptied into that, what was a lagoon at the time. It opened, and you can see in the image that we'll have available for you, that this lagoon, and by lagoon we mean it's a body of water that empties into a sea. So it's not an enclosed lake, it's a lagoon. Okay, so Nile water and then flows out and into the Mediterranean. So Jeremiah is speaking, as we'll see a little bit later, sort of making a political statement. Why do you turn to Egypt for help? When Assyria's beaten up on you, you turn to Egypt. If Egypt's beaten up on you, you turn to Assyria, and not turn to me. Jeremiah goes on, and if I get a little preachy here, it's Jeremiah's preaching. He said in verse 12 and 13, still in chapter 2, "Be appalled, O heavens, at this. Be shocked, be utterly desolate, says the Lord, for my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." And so he's using two images of water. The first one in a political sense of going to these countries, and the other one is choosing to drink water from a stagnant well or cistern as compared to drinking living water, which is flowing water from a stream like the Gihon spring in Jerusalem. You know, if you see the water green and murky in a cistern versus the bubbly fresh water coming out of the rock, what do you want to drink? That's a no-brainer. But in terms of their faith, they're doing this by turning away from God, the true living water. They're turning to pagan water that can only cause sickness and illness. So he's using two different water motifs, one political, one spiritual, in this chapter. But it's interesting that he mentions Shihor here, and again, it's hard to know sometimes when these things were written, but as we'll see, Jeremiah actually would have walked by Shihor in later times. So let's get to that part of the story. If you fast forward to the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC, Jeremiah was captured, put in chains, and was going to be taken to Babylon along with the other exiles. What happened next was that Nebuchadnezzar, the great emperor, had heard of Jeremiah. Apparently Jeremiah's preaching was known because he was saying, hey, Judah, surrender, don't fight, you're only going to hurt yourself. The best thing is to submit, go into exile. That's God's plan. And so for that, Jeremiah was treated as a traitor by his own people, but by the king of Babylon said, hey, you're on my side. Yeah. I want to take good care of you. I don't want anything to happen to you. So we read about this in Jeremiah 39 and 40, where Nebuchadnezzar says to his general, Nebuzaradan, who actually took Jerusalem, he said, look, find Jeremiah and take good care of him, treat him well, etc., etc. And Jeremiah is given the option to stay in Judah or to go with him. And Nebuzaradan actually says, look, I will look after you well. I'll take good care of you, which is interesting that the pagans treated Jeremiah better than his own people did. But be that as it may, he decided to stay. About 2 months later, an assassination took place of the governor that Nebuchadnezzar had appointed, named Gedaliah. And along with him, there was a garrison of Babylonian soldiers that was there as peacekeepers or minding the king's interests, and they were killed. And the remnant of the Jews, and there were some Judeans who were left, said, we got to get out of here. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar's coming back. You can't kill his governor. You can't kill his appointed. You can't wipe out his garrison and not expect reprisals. So they approached Jeremiah and said, look, we think we should go to Babylon. We should go to Egypt. What does the Lord say? And it tells us that for 10 days, Jeremiah prayed. Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, stay, don't go to Egypt. Whatever you do, don't go to Egypt. Stay in the land. I'll take good care of you, et cetera, et cetera. And the people said, no, God didn't tell you that. We're going. And we find out that Jeremiah went along with these refugees now fleeing to Egypt. This is in chapter 42. And we learn that Jeremiah the prophet, this is Jeremiah 43 and verse 7, Jeremiah the prophet and Baruch the son of Neriah, who in chapter 36 of Jeremiah is the scribe who wrote down Jeremiah's dictations, who actually physically wrote the book of Jeremiah for us, and they came to the land of Egypt. So let's just stop right there. If we go back, and so Jeremiah, this is all taking place right after 586, apparently only a couple months after the fall of Jerusalem. So within a matter of months, we have this group of Judeans fleeing to Egypt thinking they're going to be secure there. Why does Jeremiah go? Why does Jeremiah not obey the Lord?
Yeah,
well, there must have been another word from God, because what Jeremiah does when he gets to Egypt is start to preach. He preaches. And so obviously God says, well, take your word and let him have it. So all that to say, Jeremiah goes with them and Baruch alongside. If you go back to the New Kingdom, that is the period of the Exodus. Wherever you want the Exodus to be, you'll probably agree, I think, it fits into the New Kingdom somewhere. At that time, Shihor, that body of water that we talked about just moments ago, was a lagoon that was open to the sea. Starting late in the 13th century, we have both geological evidence for this and textual evidence for this, is that there must have been a significant climate change, yes, climate change, in the 13th century BC in Central Africa, because the flow of the Nile is tied to rains in Central Africa. So the drought in Joseph's day was not because there was a problem with the Nile in Egypt, it was a problem with the rains in Kenya and Uganda and Ethiopia, the sources of the Nile. And it's change going on down there that affects the Nile. So what happened is the Nile discharges were lowered. The flow of the Nile was diminished. And what happened is several of the branches of the Nile began to silt up. We know this because the great city that Ramses the Great built, Ramesses, named after himself, was abandoned about 1130 BC. And that's because it was now cut off from the Nile that was its highway.
Yeah.
And so here you have this largest city in the world that was just isolated, cut off. And so what happened is those branches now that flowed out into Shihor were reduced to a trickle. So what happened as time goes, the Nile moved forward north. And in the course of the 700 years or 600 years from the time of the Exodus, when if you wanted to go from Egypt to Canaan or Canaan to Egypt, you had to travel around, go around the Shihor, because you couldn't walk across because it was emptying into the Mediterranean. In the 600-700 years in between, what had happened is as the Nile transgressed north and Shihor shrunk, the opening to the Shihor to the Mediterranean dried up. And we know that because there's an archaeological site built there sometime in the first millennium that could not have been there 300-400 years earlier.
Wow.
It was water, now it's dry land. And so what had happened was the road that went around that Shihor now could be a straight line, and you can see this on the map. So if you look at Jeremiah 44, it doesn't mention Shihor, but we know it's there because Jeremiah mentioned it in 2:18. But in 44, Jeremiah 44, it says, "The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah concerning the Judeans who lived in Egypt." There were already Judeans living there when he got there. So that was his preaching audience. Mm-hmm. He already had a congregation waiting for him. At Migdol, at Tahpanhes, at Memphis, and in the land of Pathros. Pathros, again, you've got to know Egyptian. It means Pa-ta-resi, it means the southland, southern Egypt. Interesting that Migdol, we'll talk about that in a moment, is the northmost fort, the entry point of Egypt at this time. And all the way to the south, there were Judeans in Egypt. When did they get there? Some may have come in 597 when the first attack on Jerusalem came and Jehoiachin was taken prisoner. Some may have come before 586, fleeing Jerusalem, maybe some during the attack on Judah fled to Egypt, but you have a lot of Judean refugees living in Egypt. So why is all this significant? First of all, back in the 1980s, the Israeli archaeologist Eliezer Oren discovered a large fort on the frontier of Egypt, and he identified it as Migdol of the prophets. That's what he called it. Because Migdol is mentioned here in the book of Jeremiah. It's also mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. And Ezekiel talks about it as being the northmost point, just like the Bible speaks of Dan to Beersheba. Mm-hmm. So in Jeremiah and Ezekiel's day, it was Migdol to Aswan in the south. So this is the entry point of Egypt. This is where I'm sure the refugees would have had their passports looked at, their documents checked, and the fort is right on the edge of Shihor. And it guarded the road now across the northern end of this. And halfway, their destination is Tahpanhes, which we'll get to in a moment. But halfway between Migdol and Tahpanhes is an old site of the frontier forts of Charu Sile. These were Egypt's frontier forts, especially in the New Kingdom. There was still a fort there in the 7th century. It's a much smaller place at that time, but equally important. Now, Tahpanhes is a new city. It wasn't around in earlier times. It was apparently founded by the first ruler of the 26th dynasty, and he was the father of Necho II, who appears in the Bible as the killer of Josiah. His father was Psammiticus I. And Psammitics reigned for about 50 years, beefed up Egypt's military, built up forts, and he wanted to be a great king like pharaohs of the past. So he established Tahpanhes as a military administrative center, and he also probably or maybe one of his predecessors built up this fort at Migdol, which became the new entry point for Egypt. And this was necessitated by the change in the ancient environment, because the route into Egypt had changed. Now they had to change the location of their forts to guard these entrances. Now, the very fact that the Bible mentions Migdol, Tahpanhes, and Memphis, we have a sequence which we can trace on a map now. Here's the new archaeological discovery that's interesting. So the first important discovery really is geological, that we can now say that the route described here could only have taken place sometime only slightly before Jeremiah's time or later, because that would have been impossible to traverse the lagoon. The lagoon now is a lake. It's a brackish small lake. By the way, why would you go drink the waters of Shihor? Not very good at this point. It's not a freshwater, it's a brackish lake. In 2011, at the site of Tahpanhes, which is Tel Daphne in Egyptian, known in Arabic today, a large slab of stone we call a stela with an inscription on it was found. And it's the first reference we have. It's dated to the pharaoh Apries, or Hophra. Hophra is mentioned in Jeremiah 44. He was the king when Jeremiah and his band arrived in Egypt. And this is a stela, an inscription of Pharaoh Hophra, Apries, the Greek name is Apries. And he mentions in the stela that, and it's dated, by the way, to 582 BC, the 7th year of Apries, 582 BC. Why is that significant? Because 582 BC is the year Nebuchadnezzar's troops did return to Judah. Remember, this group left fearing Nebuchadnezzar would come. Reactions were not swift and immediate. They didn't have an air force until they got their armies together from whatever else they were doing to revenge the death of Gedaliah and the Babylonian garrison. It took a couple years. We know that date from Jeremiah 52, where it dates that, I think it's the 37th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, which works out to be 582 BC. So this is the first text ever found that refers to these foreigners, these Asiatics, and Apries is sending his army across Sinai basically to confront them and make sure they didn't enter Sinai and come into Egypt. So just fun speculation. Could Jeremiah and the military people he was with provided the intelligence to the Egyptians saying, hey, the Babylonians may be coming. You might want to be on, the lookout for them.
Yep.
It's just an interesting possibility, how they knew that they might be coming. So that was found in 2011. And it mentions they took the eastern road across Sinai. Now, last year in May, a second stela was found in the farm fields just outside of the Tell. So clearly the Tell, the archaeological site, is more than just where it is, because the fields are being and a farmer found this, I mean, it's like 6 feet tall and or more. And fortunately, he did the right thing. He called the archaeologists. They came in. And here's now a second stela of Opries. This was found in May of this past year. And there have been press reports and photographs, and so I've been able to look at the text. And it also mentions the king sending his army. And here's what's interesting, and this was in the press, so I can say it without violating any ethical norms, because it's not published, and I have to be fair to those who are found it and are publishing it. But it mentions the site of Charu. Now, Charu is that fort that I said was between Migdol and Tahpanhes. You can see that on the map. This means that Hophra's army, the Egyptian armies, was going on this very same road past Migdol that Jeremiah and his team came in the other direction.
It adds another name in there.
It adds the Charu name. And so it shows that that road was now the road to enter in and out of Egypt. And that represents a significant change since the Exodus, when anybody leaving Egypt would have had to go around the Shihor Lake, and now you could actually travel across the north end of it. So for me, it does a couple things. Number one, you can accurately now trace how Jeremiah and the group of Judeans came into Egypt. And this text and the geological and archaeological data, when you bring these three together, you can also see that the geography described here is very exact. He's got it nailed down perfectly.
According to the proper time of when it would be.
At the right time,
yes,
yeah, because Tahpanhes wasn't around earlier. So it's interesting that the Exodus story, which geographically is in the same region, many critics of the Bible say, well, the Exodus story and the geography and all this is written in the 7th century, and maybe it has some vague memories, but it's really written from the perspective and the time of the 7th century. If so, Tahpanhes would have been mentioned. It wasn't there in Moses' day, but it's here in Jeremiah's day. So sometimes things that are mentioned or things that are not mentioned can actually reflect changes both in geography or geopolitics or actually urban realities, where there were cities, where there were not. So this is the crux of this article, to sort of spell out the geological data, bring together the biblical text, the Egyptian text, and this is what I meant earlier by talking about biblical archaeology being really an integration of various disciplines, the chief goal of which is to help us read the biblical text with greater understanding.
Well, I mean, this is pretty exciting stuff. I mean, I appreciate you sharing this. And you know, for those watching, Dr. Hoffmeier, you can go to the Tyndale Bulletin website if you want to see his article there. It is a technical article. It's meant to have all the footnotes and everything else. He's working on another kind of more popular article for Biblical Archaeology Review, which will be coming out soon. But this is where, when we do these archaeology updates, it's really important, because we talk, Lynn, I say a lot about humility, that in order to come to some sort of final declaration about really most anything, there's general parameters that are true and accurate. But here we have, as the technology has increased and more excavations even accidentally happen, more things come out of the ground, which shed light on the biblical record. To me, I'll just say this was neat to see the precision of the biblical record, which until now was unable to be appreciated. Would you say that's true?
Well, yes, I think that is one of the benefits of this, because it brings together a convergence of these different sources of information. Any one of them by themselves would not have had the same impact, but it's the collocation of texts, archaeology, geology, the Bible, that makes this all come alive. Now, another interesting point is, I remember I mentioned there were two of these stela that were found of Pharaoh Hophra, both at Tel Dafina, or Tahpanes of the Bible. And when the first one was published in 2011, it was published by Dr. Muhammad Abdul Maqsood, who excavated the fortresses of Charu, and his colleague from the Sorbonne, Dominique Valbel, as published in French. But when they published it, they also went into great length talking about the Jeremiah references. Now, they didn't talk about Shihor and all that, but they talked about the events in Jeremiah that led to the Babylonians coming. And so I thought it's interesting that here are secular scholars recognizing that the Bible had a place in connection with what was going on in history. So that was a rather nice little touch. But then I've taken that like 2 steps further.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, these archaeology updates, again, they're meant to show the reliability of Scripture, and these are just some of the things. And it's fun. It's fun watching it. It's fun having access to you to share. And so we're going to continue to keep these going. At the end of the day, we appreciate your prayers for what we're doing here. We want to continue to provide to you confidence in the Scripture, which ultimately, as always, points us to the gospel of Jesus Christ, that it's through Him that we're saved. And as you watch these, we're unashamed to say that these are going to help us to really see the reliability of Scripture and point to the gospel. So appreciate you watching, and we will see you next time.